Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Hey, fake news, fake money. How about fake meat? Stacey.
This is beyond crazy, and it's beyond Keiser. Apparently, we're now the Keiser Report. But, there's a new company on the NASDAQ trading. It's one of these wannabe unicorns. It's called Beyond Meat. And it's packaged and sold and part of this new economy of beyond any value, beyond any protein, beyond any content, beyond any real ingredients. It's all artificial ingredients sold as something to save the world. And in 2018, Beyond Meat lost $29.9 million on revenue of $87.9 million, and yet it was trading at $69 a share, $4 billion market cap. What? It's losing a lot of money on its fake meat, and it's beyond crazy, but investors, it did pop by, 176% on its opening and on its IPO, and this is beyond crazy.
Well, it's unicorn meat. That's it's there. They have vast herds of unicorn that they raise on the wild plains of North Dakota, and then they harvest those unicorns and they package them into patties, and they're sold as Beyond Meat. And of course it's worth $4 billion because in an era of fake news and fake money, why not have fake meat? So fake has become the new real, and real has become too expensive. No one can afford meat going forward. I mean, the idea getting a porterhouse steak will cost, $500,000, and only Warren Buffett will be there, Smith and Walensky every year having lunch with a billionaire eating a real meat that was taken from a cow. It'll be $500,000. Meanwhile, everyone else will be eating bug-encrusted bug dogs or bug meat and, harvested from the locusts that are invading our daily lives in biblical nightmares, and then frying that up as an upside of having uniform, basic locust meat patties. And there'll be Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi. Everyone's going to get an Andrew Yang universal basic yak meat. Not even yak meat.
That's yak meat.
Yeah,
unicorn
yak meat's
meat.
good.
Unicorn meats don't exist. But they'll tell people will believe it. Within 5 years, people will believe that unicorns are real, and we'll be in the period of time where oldsters that we remember a time before unicorns existed. And another myth going around is that the Fed is unwinding QE, the economy is amazing, there's real growth, everything is perfect, and all those newly minted billionaires on Wall Street, remember Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, they became personally billionaires since the financial crisis. That seems unusual, right? Because how do they become billionaires in an economy that is decimated and all we have left are unicorns running around in North Dakota? Well, the Fed will give banks a $36 billion taxpayer-funded subsidy this year. So this actually comes ultimately from the Treasury. They pay banks $36 billion this year. And this is something that a lot of people don't point out to what has been happening in the United States in particular. It's not happening in Europe because they have negative rates on deposit. But before 2009, the Fed did not pay interest on banks' excess reserves held at the Fed. This practice was introduced as a taxpayer-funded subsidy to the banks during the crisis. Taxpayer-funded because the Fed turns over any profit at the end of the year to the Treasury. So the Fed is paying what should have been going to the Treasury, and instead we decided through some ledger domain to pay the bankers instead. So this $36 billion that is going to the bankers would have gone to the taxpayer. And to put that into context, how much we're gifting them this year, and let's position it as welfare. Some people don't have that much money and they need food stamps. Well, this is about 50% of the food stamp budget. So this is how much we're giving this is food stamps for Wall Street, essentially.
Well, it's a two-tier economy. There's two different worlds that exist in America. So if I go into a big bank, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo Bank, and I say, I want to borrow $100,000, and I want you to charge me a 0% interest rate on that, and then I want to deposit that $100,000 at your bank, and I want you to pay me 5% on that, and I want to therefore collect all that income and get it tax-free. Okay, can I do that?
No.
No. But a bank can do that.
Yeah.
These same banks can go to the Federal Reserve Bank and say, I'd like to borrow $1 billion, charge me nothing, and then I want to deposit it with you, and I want to collect an interest on that, tax-free.
The article points out that there is no provision for this to ever be paid back. So it's genuinely food stamps for Wall Street. Food stamp recipients themselves are nonstop maligned on Fox, on CNBC, on CNN, on the cable news. They're maligned and berated and made to feel like nobody ever talks about these bankers being gifted $36 billion a year, and I think it was even higher last year. If the banks had been required to take excess reserves back onto their books, it would have required financial disclosure of their quality, which is probably toxic for many. However, with the Financial Accounting Standards Board recently promulgating Financial Accounting Statements 56 and previously 157, which was the extend and pretend statement, it would seem they feel less and less need for financial disclosure of any kind, because FAS 56, the Financial Accounting Statements 56, states that the government does not have to disclose what it spends taxpayers' money on because of national security concerns.
Oh my, Craig Wright is running the Fed. So in other words, the banks were caught committing accounting fraud, that they had billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets on their books that they claimed were worth, let's say, 100 cents in the dollar that are actually worth zero. So the government, the federal government, the institution that we support with our taxes, gave them a deal. They said, look, either you're going to have to fess up to the fact that you're insolvent, or you're going to have to let us engage in this massive fraud where you borrow money from us for 0% and then deposit it back with us so that you can generate enough money to paper over your fraud. That's your choice.
We started off with Beyond Meat, and there used to be a thing called meat, and that was taken from cattle, from cows, from goats, from various pigs and creatures.
Bunny rabbits.
Yeah, bunny rabbits, squirrels, and people would eat this thing called meat. Then everybody in their minds was trained to think of meat as something that you need, protein, it builds, power and wealth and internal, your body wealth. And then we swapped it out with a thing that we still called meat, just like corn. Maize used to have proteins in it, and now it has nothing but starch and blah. And, so we created something that just makes you fat, doesn't help you with any nutrients, doesn't build body strength, doesn't build anything. Here's the same thing, is we used to have banks that lent to the economy, lent for mortgages, lent for businesses, and tried to create wealth for the economy. Now, the Fed looked at their books and said, oh my God, this is worth nothing. However, we could have a unicorn economy instead. We'll swap all that out. If we keep on doing, well, you used to perform magic tricks in Times Square. How do you, distract people? You keep on moving the little cups so nobody knows where the little ball is.
Well,
right?
we learned in the crisis that it's not an insolvency issue, it's an illiquidity issue. We just got to keep moving the cup and ball faster and faster.
So nobody could look at it. So nobody could do an audit of it. That's why they keep on swapping it between the banks and the Fed over and over.
Right, remember the Lehman Repo 105 scandal?
Yeah.
During the scandal is that every time the auditors came to look at Lehman's books, they moved their debts into an offshore or a special purpose vehicle. Then the auditors would go to the next bank, and then they would move those back to their bank, and then that bank would be looked by Lehman. So it's this constant shell game that we learned. Now, there is this huge garbage patch in the middle of the ocean that's like 3 times the size of France. It's plastic garbage. The Federal Reserve around the world, the central banks, you have to understand that they are exuding, garbage. Fiat money is garbage. And when we find a whale with hundreds of pounds of plastic in its gut and it died from garbage consumption, look at the average American is dying from the garbage consumption of high fructose corn syrup. And people say, oh, the price of food's gone down. And if you don't, believe us, it's true. I do believe you, because I see a massive obesity problem in this country, and that's the price of having fake food that they shouldn't charge even a penny for it. It's like eating plastic. It is plastic, and many times it's just plastic. There are a lot of fast food restaurants that actually supplement their buffet, all-you-can-eat buffets, with actual bags of plastic. If you talk to anyone in the fast food industry, they'll say, yeah, that fish dish is actually 20% actual plastic that we add to as filler.
So again, the Financial Accounting Standards Board is introducing this new accounting standard of FAST 2056. You don't have to tell us what's on your books under national security reasons, because obviously the national security issue is that if people stop believing in the value of the dollar, then, or whatever your fiat is, then of course it all falls apart. So I'm going to look at another national security issue for the counterparties to this toxic debt. Central banks are ditching the dollar for gold. So that's a headline from Bloomberg. I think those go hand in hand. If you're the creditor to a nation where they're introducing new accounting standards, increasingly basically hiding more and more information about what is actually in that nothing burger, well, first quarter gold purchases by central banks led by Russia and China were the highest in 6 years as countries diversify their assets away from the US dollar. Global gold reserves rose by 145.5 tons in the first quarter, which is a 68% increase from a year earlier. And it wasn't just Russia and China, but Kazakhstan and Turkey, which also are usual gold buyers. But new to this this year, for the first time since 2014, was Ecuador. Qatar and Colombia are also starting to stockpile some gold.
Yeah, every country where this show is broadcast is buying gold, because as we've been educating countries for 10 years now, if you don't own gold, forget it. You're done. You're toast.
Like beyond meat, this is beyond fiat. People are seeing that. If you look at the world and you see that a lot of people are engaged in this, they forgot that underlying our global economy, even to this day, with all that fiat, all those derivatives, the fact is it's still backed by gold at the end of the day. So you want to own the gold, you want to own the meat, and yet inflows into exchange-traded funds backed by gold during January have been wiped out over the rest of the year, and ETF levels are now at their lowest in 4 months. So people were taking out even it was a paper claim on some gold. They would never get the physical gold. Nevertheless, it was at least a little bit closer to the real thing, the real value, the real meat. But they've been taking their money out and putting it into beyond meat. So, they're at the end of the day, once this whole thing falls apart and the unicorn is exposed as just a horse with a cone on its head, people are going to be shocked.
Right. We've never left the gold standard. Okay, we're going to take a break beyond this segment into the next, over the vast chasm of this break of important information that you simply cannot live without. Stay tuned for much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to the man who often schools the CNBC analysts on what's really going on in the economy. Has made brilliant videos on YouTube over the years. Check those out. They've got millions of views. Peter, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me back, although I don't school too many people on CNBC anymore because they stopped having me on.
You were too good. I mean, the truth hurts. They have Rachel Maddow instead. Okay, so Peter Schiff, a venture capitalist this week, suggested there'll be never again a recession, as central banks will not allow it. He did not say this was a good thing. He also saw growth forever being anemic, as in Japan. He recently, on the central bank, the Fed, changed their policy. They now openly decide that permanent quantitative easing is the way to go. And is this going to work, Peter?
No, although I guess he didn't rule out a depression, so maybe he'll be right. Instead of a recession, we'll end up with a depression. But it won't be the depression that people read about from the 1930s, because during that depression, consumers were relieved because prices went down. This time, prices are going way up. And what we might end up having is hyperinflation, and that's the worst possible economic scenario. Look, the only reason that the dollar didn't collapse as a result of QE1, QE2, was because everybody believed that it was temporary, that the Fed could actually reverse the policy and remove the liquidity. They had an exit strategy. And people to this day still believe that, despite the fact that it's clear that the Fed has no ability to do that, because they already had to call off the hikes based on the first decline in the market as soon as we hit a bear market. But I do think when this next recession starts, and it is going to start, I mean, we're on the cusp of it now, despite that 3.1% GDP print in Q1. If you look beneath that headline, there were a lot of problems in that GDP number, and it doesn't look good for Q2 or any of the quarters probably thereafter. But when the Fed goes back to zero, when they launch QE4, which will be bigger than the first three combined. In fact, if you look at the size of the federal budget deficits now, the government is borrowing almost $1.5 trillion per year, and the recession hasn't even started yet, which means when we go into recession, you can expect $3 trillion per year budget deficits. I mean, that's going to require the mother of all QEs to monetize. And when the Fed has to do that, nobody is going to believe it's temporary. Nobody is going to believe they'll ever be able to shrink that balance sheet. Nobody is going to believe they'll ever be able to normalize interest rates. And as inflation really starts to pick up, which is exactly what it's going to do during the next recession, as the dollar weakens, you're going to see stagflation, and that's going to result in a dollar crisis.
Now, one of your former neighbors up there in Connecticut, Ray Dalio, he expects what he would call MMT-like policies. That would be modern monetary theory-like policies to emerge soon. Okay, I guess this is in part and parcel with talk in the Democrats about introducing all kinds of socialism, et cetera. What are your thoughts on this, Peter?
I agree that I think they're going to try it. It's just not going to last very long because it's going to blow up very quickly. We're going to have a dollar crisis, and then it doesn't matter how much money you print. If you can't buy anything with it, then it doesn't do any good. I mean, if you got all these liberals that think they can finance socialism by printing money, well, if nobody wants the money, then it doesn't matter how much you print because the prices keep going up and you can't buy anything. But I do think that we're going to try that. I mean, we've tried everything else. And I think that when this next recession starts, and it's going to be blamed on capitalism, it's going to be blamed on Trump, and it may well mean that we have a socialist president in 2021 and a socialist Congress. And obviously, they're going to raise taxes on the rich, but that's not going to generate anywhere near the amount of money that they would need to finance this laundry list of socialist programs that they've been promising the voters. So the only way to attempt to finance it is through printing money. But of course, it's not going to work. They'll try it, but the money will collapse in value, and then we're going to have a real crisis.
Peter Schiff, let's return to Bitcoin. I know you got a debate coming up with Barry Silbert in Vegas, but here's some ideas here. So recently, somebody moved over $200 million in Bitcoin on chain. It costs less than $4 to make this transaction, and so again, when you compare that to fiat money or even gold, how do you compete with that? It took Germany 7 years to move some of their gold from New York to Frankfurt.
Well, when you say only $4, I mean, I don't know where the price was and how much the market had to move to accommodate that large a trade, but I'm assuming that there was some type of discount in order to get it moved, and so there's no way that it was done for $4. Maybe the fee was $4, but the market would have to adjust the price in order to find a buyer for that large a trade.
You're referring to some slippage going on, and in this case, there was none. The actual cost of moving that amount of money on chain is, in fact, $4. I mean, that's one of the beauties of this technology, and that's why the market is seeming to favor it in a big way. Check that out. I want to move on because you can check that data yourself, but I want to move on. We have some viewer questions. One asked, is there a price at which Peter Schiff would agree to come back on the Keiser report and look in the camera and say, I was wrong about Bitcoin?
Well, wrong in what respect? I mean, I don't have, a upward price target. Look, is it possible that the price of Bitcoin can go higher? Well, of course. Is it possible that it can go all the way back up to 20,000? Look, anything is possible. I would say that it's probable that it won't. I think it's more likely than not that 20,000 was the peak of this bubble. But could the peak be higher? Of course, right? Nothing is for sure.
Right. Well, I think that the question is not a great question because it's not actually Peter Schiff or anyone else. It's really the market itself is going to determine what the outcome of this all is. So it's not really price has anything much to do with it. But let me ask another question from a viewer. Says, why does Peter ignore technology? Bitcoin, Tesla, solar, wind, robotics, 3D printing. Okay, is this true, Peter? Are you a Luddite?
I don't ignore technology. I embrace technology. It just, why do the people who like Bitcoin ignore, monetary history? Why do they ignore economics? Why do they ignore logic and reality? Just because there's a technology around Bitcoin doesn't mean Bitcoin has any value as money or that it'll ever be a store of value. I mean, I think a lot of people want to accuse me of just not knowing enough about Bitcoin. The problem is I know too much about Bitcoin. That's why I'm not buying it. It's the people who are buying it that don't know anything about it. But I think they're too blinded by the fact that it's gone up and the fact that they hope it keeps going up. You have a lot of people out there who actually believe that they are going to be very, very wealthy, and all they have to do is hold on to their Bitcoin. They don't have to actually work. They don't have to make any real money. They just have to hold on and hope, right? Just hodl these Bitcoins, and they'll be multimillionaires. Well, it's a nice fantasy, but it isn't going to happen. But a lot of people refuse to admit that because, it basically rains on their parade. And so they're too mentally wedded to this to actually see reality.
Have you, by chance, read Safdina Moose's book, The Bitcoin Standard?
No, I haven't. I haven't even heard of it.
Okay, it's an excellent book. We'll send you a copy, courtesy of the Keiser Report, to get your thoughts on it. One of the nice attributes of Bitcoin, of course, versus gold is that with gold, you still do need a third-party verification on transactions, where with Bitcoin, you do not. This is another...
Well, wait. Well, with Bitcoin, you need all these miners to verify all these transactions. You need a whole computer network. And by the way, to the extent that actually Bitcoin could succeed in scaling up, where people around the world are actually using it on a regular basis as money, I think the cost to verify all these transactions as far as energy consumed would be so prohibitively high. I mean, it's like it would be the most expensive endeavor. I don't know I've heard estimates, maybe 1/3 of all the world's energy would have to be devoted to verifying Bitcoin transactions, which is an extremely expensive cost to have for money.
Compared to gold, and everything comes with the gold, and fiat money, certainly, it's less. Plus, the
gold
energy
is much cheaper, Max.
Plus, more than 70% of the energy used in the network of Bitcoin is renewable, and the number can go to 100%. So it actually favors renewable energy. So let's talk about Warren Buffett for a second. He is, of course, also anti-Bitcoin. I know you probably don't like being in the same camp as Warren. What are your thoughts on his enthusiasm for stock buybacks, however, Peter? Is this the best use of capital in your view? Why not return the money to shareholders via dividends instead of throwing it into these stock purchases? The top line message is that we want to reward shareholders, Peter. Why not just give them a dividend, Peter?
They should give them a dividend. I mean, now that the tax rate between corporate dividends and capital gains are the same, why not return this cash to shareholders, and they can decide if they think the stock is undervalued, and they can buy more.
So they're just pumping up the value of the stock options, Peter. That's all they're doing, and it's not right.
You're not going to get an argument from me, but I don't think the government should do anything about it. But I think the reality is the government is what's fueling it with the cheap money. If it wasn't for the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates artificially low, we wouldn't be having all these stock buybacks. A lot of it is financed by debt. And the debt is cheap because of the Fed. So if you're upset about this, get mad at the central banks for keeping the game going.
When Charlie Munger says up on stage that when Wells Fargo stole money from 1 million customers, but he said it was, quote, an honest mistake. Do you, as somebody in the investment business, are you ashamed when someone like Charlie Munger besmirches your industry in such a way?
I'm not exactly familiar with all the facts regarding what Wells Fargo may have done with respect to customers. But, I do agree with Munger and with Warren Buffett about some things. I certainly agree with them when it comes to Bitcoin. They have the same problem with it that I do. And, Warren Buffett's a good stock picker. I mean, he knows how to analyze a business. I mean, I'm not going to take that away from him. But I do think a lot of the stuff he's been saying about macroeconomics has been wrong. And in fact, once upon a time, I mean, he was a buyer of gold. He was worried about inflation and big budget deficits. He said that himself. He said that, he used to be concerned about the budget deficit, but now that it's gotten so big, now that the national debt has gotten so large and we haven't seen a problem, now he no longer worries about it. Well, I think just because the problem gets bigger doesn't mean it's gone away. And just because you haven't experienced the adverse consequences doesn't mean you won't. And by the way, we have experienced a lot of adverse consequences. It's just not evident in the stock market, but it is evident in the standard of living of the average American. I mean, that's the main reason that so many people voted for Trump, because we had 8 years of a phony recovery under Barack Obama, and many voters knew that. Many voters realized that there was no real recovery, that their circumstances had actually gone down, that they were in worse shape after 8 years of Obama than they were when he began. The problem is Trump has simply, expanded those policies.
We're out of time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay, anytime.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our extra special guest, soon to be debating Barry Silbert in Vegas on this famous Bitcoin versus gold debate, Peter Schiff. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.